Hello everyone. Today, Biker Justice Analyst bring you a story full of humanity and compassion. Enjoy listening.
She wrote, "Help" on the napkin. The Hell's Angel. At table 12 noticed before the waiter. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows as Madeline slipped into a worn leather booth. Her hands trembled slightly as she removed her light jacket, revealing fresh bruises on her arms that she quickly covered with her sleeves. The familiar scent of coffee and warm apple pie filled the air, offering a small comfort in her troubled world. "Can I get you something to drink, honey?" A kind-faced waitress approached, notepad in hand. Her name tag read, Betty. "Just coffee, please," Madeline whispered, managing a weak smile. She kept her eyes down, a habit she'd developed over the years with Caleb. Looking people in the eye sometimes made him angry. So many things made him angry these days. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today." Now back to the story. The diner was quiet, with only a few other customers scattered around. An elderly couple shared a slice of pie near the counter. A trucker nursed a cup of coffee at the far end, and at the table next to hers, a large man sat alone, though Madeline barely registered his presence. Betty returned with her coffee. "Cream and sugar are right there, sweetie. Take your time with the menu." Madeline wrapped her fingers around the warm mug, letting its heat seep into her cold hands. The morning's fight with Caleb played over and over in her mind. He'd thrown her phone against the wall when he found a text from her sister. "Who else are you talking to behind my back?" he'd screamed. The memory made her flinch. She stirred cream into her coffee, watching the dark liquid turn a softer shade of brown. How long had it been since she'd felt safe? Since she'd been able to breathe without wondering what might set him off? The questions swirled in her mind like the cream in her coffee. The diner's soft music played overhead, some old country song about love and loss. Madeline took a small sip of her coffee, savoring its warmth. Outside, cars passed by on the main street, their drivers unaware of her silent struggle. Inside these walls, she could pretend, just for a moment, that she was normal, that she wasn't living in constant fear. Her fingers brushed against the stack of napkins on the table. An idea formed in her mind, terrifying and hopeful all at once. She'd read about women leaving notes for help in public places. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes someone noticed. But what if Caleb found out? Her hand shook at the thought. He always seemed to find out everything. Yet something inside her, some small spark of courage that hadn't been completely extinguished, made her reach for a napkin. The white paper felt rough against her fingertips. She smoothed it out on the table, her movements slow and deliberate. From her purse, she retrieved a pen, the same one she'd used earlier to write down her grocery list, making sure to include the exact brands Caleb demanded. Glancing around nervously, Madeline held the pen above the napkin. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The afternoon sun continued to stream through the window, catching the dust motes in its golden light. With trembling fingers, she pressed the pen to the napkin. Each letter was carefully formed, a silent cry written in her neat handwriting. Help. The word looked both powerful and pathetic on the white paper. She folded the napkin carefully, creasing it with shaking fingers. The weight of what she'd just done pressed heavily on her chest as she placed it beside her plate, trying to appear casual. She didn't notice the large man at the next table, whose attention had been drawn to her nervous movements. Jack Moore sat in his usual corner booth, his large frame making the seat seem smaller than it was. His weathered leather vest creaked as he leaned back, the patches from his former life with the Hells Angels now covered by newer ones promoting peace and healing. The afternoon light caught the intricate tattoos that wound their way up his arms, telling stories of a past he'd rather forget. He wrapped his calloused hands around his coffee mug, trying to find some peace after a long day at the shelter. Being a volunteer counselor for abuse victims wasn't easy, but it beat the life he'd left behind. The coffee was getting cold, but his mind wasn't on the drink. Something about the woman who'd just sat down nearby had caught his attention. Years of reading people, both as a former gang member and now as a counselor, had taught him to notice the little things. The way she hunched her shoulders, making herself smaller. How her eyes darted around the room, never settling in one place for too long. The careful way she adjusted her sleeves, a movement he'd seen too many times before. Betty, the waitress, approached his table with a fresh pot of coffee. "Need a refill, Jack?" He nodded, keeping his voice low. "Thanks, Betty." He'd become a regular here over the past few years, and the staff no longer flinched at his intimidating appearance. They'd learned that beneath the tough exterior was a man trying to make amends for his past. The woman in the next booth stirred her coffee endlessly, lost in thought. Jack noticed how she jumped slightly when the bell above the door chimed, announcing new customers. Her reaction was subtle. Most people wouldn't have caught it. But to Jack, it might as well have been a flashing warning sign. He pretended to focus on his own coffee, but his peripheral vision stayed fixed on her movements. The way she clutched her purse close, as if ready to flee at any moment. The slight tremor in her hands as she reached for the sugar packet. These weren't the actions of someone having a bad day. These were the tells of someone living in fear. When she reached for the napkin, Jack's attention sharpened. He'd seen this before too. The hesitation in her movements, the way she glanced around furtively, checking if anyone was watching. His heart sank as he recognized the pattern. He'd helped enough women at the shelter to know what might be coming next. Her pen moved carefully across the napkin. From his angle, he couldn't make out the words immediately, but he saw how deliberately she formed each letter, as if each stroke required all her courage. When she folded the napkin, her fingers trembled. Jack shifted slightly in his seat, adjusting his position to get a better view. As she placed the napkin on the table, the fold opened just enough for him to see it. 4 letters that made his chest tighten. Help. The woman's eyes darted around the diner again, her tension visible in every movement. Jack knew that look. It was the look of someone who'd finally gathered the courage to reach out, but was terrified of the consequences. Without hesitation, Jack stood up. His massive frame cast a shadow across her table as he rose to his full height. The chains on his jeans clinked softly, and his heavy boots thudded against the linoleum floor as he took the few steps toward her table. He knew his appearance would likely frighten her. It frightened most people. But sometimes, he'd learned, the scariest-looking person in the room could be the safest one to turn to. Madeline's heart skipped a beat as the massive figure approached her table. Her fingers instinctively tightened around her coffee cup, her knuckles turning white. The man's shadow fell across her table, and she could feel the weight of his presence looming over her. She forced herself to look up, meeting a pair of unexpectedly gentle eyes set in a weathered face. Despite his intimidating appearance, the leather vest, the tattoos that covered his arms, the thick beard, there was something in those eyes that made her pause. They weren't threatening. They held concern. "Ma'am," he said, his voice surprisingly soft for such a large man. "Are you okay?" The question caught her off guard. She'd expected threats, demands, or worse. Instead, his tone carried genuine worry. Madeline's gaze darted around the diner, checking if anyone was watching this exchange. Betty, the waitress, was busy with other customers. A few elderly regulars sat at the counter, absorbed in their newspapers and pancakes. She started, then stopped. Her throat felt dry. Years of Caleb's conditioning made talking to strangers, especially men, feel dangerous. She unconsciously tugged at her sleeve, making sure it covered the bruises from last night's argument. The man pulled out the chair across from her, moving slowly, deliberately, as if trying not to startle a frightened animal. "I couldn't help but notice your napkin," he said, keeping his voice low enough that only she could hear. Madeline's cheeks flushed. She quickly reached for the napkin, but his large hand gently covered it, keeping it in place. "Don't," he said softly. "You don't need to hide it. I want to help." She studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Her experience with Caleb had taught her that kind words often masked cruel intentions. But this man's expression remained open, patient, waiting for her to decide if she could trust him. "My name's Jack," he offered, withdrawing his hand from the napkin. "I volunteer at a shelter downtown. I've seen that look in your eyes before. Someone's hurting you, aren't they?" The simple question, asked with such direct compassion, made Madeline's eyes well up with tears. She blinked them back quickly. Caleb hated it when she cried in public. The thought of Caleb made her glance anxiously at the door. "Is it your boyfriend?" Jack asked gently. "Or husband?" Madeline's hands trembled as she wrapped them around her coffee cup again, seeking its warmth. "Boyfriend," she whispered, so quietly she wasn't sure he'd hear. "His name is Caleb." Jack nodded slowly, understanding filling his eyes. "And you're scared of him?" The question hung in the air between them. Madeline felt the weight of years of fear, manipulation, and pain pressing down on her chest. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Reaching into his vest pocket, Jack pulled out a small piece of paper and a pen. He wrote something down, then slid it across the table to her. "This is my number," he explained softly. "If you ever need a way out, day or night, you call. We've got safe houses, people who can help. You don't have to do this alone." Madeline stared at the paper, her fingers hovering over it uncertainly. After a moment's hesitation, she picked it up, quickly tucking it into her purse. Her voice was barely audible when she spoke again. "Thank you." Jack's heavy boots echoed across the diner floor as he walked back to his own table, leaving Madeline alone with her thoughts and the small piece of paper that now felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper, feeling the slight indentations where his pen had pressed into it. The numbers were written in a surprisingly neat hand, each digit clear and precise. The coffee in her cup had grown cold, but she barely noticed as she took another sip. Her mind raced with possibilities and consequences. The mere thought of leaving Caleb made her stomach clench with anxiety. She'd tried once before, early in their relationship, but he'd found her at her sister's house. The memory of that night still haunted her. Madeline glanced around the diner, taking in the familiar sights and sounds that usually brought her comfort. The smell of fresh pie wafting from the kitchen, the gentle clink of silverware against plates, the soft murmur of conversation. It all felt different now, charged with possibility. Betty, the waitress, passed by with a coffee pot, topping off her cup with a motherly smile. Her hands shook slightly as she reached for her purse, pulling out her phone. She stared at it, then at Jack's number. One call could change everything. But what if it made things worse? Caleb had friends everywhere, connections she didn't even know about. He always seemed to know where she was, what she was doing. The bruise on her ribs from last week's accident throbbed, as if reminding her why she needed to make this call. But the fear, that bone-deep, paralyzing fear that Caleb had carefully cultivated over the years, kept her finger hovering over the keypad without pressing down. A truck engine rumbled outside the diner window, and Madeline's head snapped up, her heart racing. False alarm, just someone pulling into the parking lot. But the brief moment of panic made her realize how hyper-vigilant she'd become, always watching, always waiting for Caleb to appear. She looked over at Jack's table, seeking reassurance. He sat with his back to the wall, seemingly absorbed in his newspaper, but she noticed how his eyes would occasionally scan the room, checking on her. His presence was both comforting and unsettling. Comforting because she felt oddly protected. Unsettling because she'd learned the hard way not to trust in protection that seemed too good to be true. The bell above the diner door chimed, and Madeline's blood ran cold. She knew that sound would haunt her nightmares, because there, silhouetted in the doorway, stood Caleb. His broad shoulders filled the frame, and even from across the room, she could feel the intensity of his presence. He hadn't spotted her yet, but she knew she had only seconds. Her hands moved quickly, almost of their own accord. The napkin with its desperate plea disappeared into her purse, followed by Jack's number. She forced her breathing to slow, tried to arrange her features into a neutral expression. Years of practice had made her good at this careful dance of appearing normal when her insides were screaming. Caleb's eyes swept the diner, sharp and calculating. Madeline's heart hammered against her ribs as his gaze moved closer and closer to her table. She picked up her coffee cup, praying he wouldn't notice how badly her hands were shaking. Caleb slid onto one of the red vinyl stools at the counter, but his eyes never left Madeline. She could feel his gaze burning into her, making the small space between them feel electric with tension. Her fingers clutched the coffee cup tighter, using it as an anchor to keep her hands from shaking. "The usual, Caleb?" Betty asked, already reaching for a clean mug. "Yeah," he grunted, drumming his fingers against the counter. The rhythmic tapping made Madeline's skin crawl. It was one of his tells, something he did when he was trying to control his anger. Madeline took another sip of her coffee, forcing herself to appear casual. The liquid felt thick in her throat, and she had to concentrate just to swallow. She shouldn't have come here. This was her safe place, and now it wouldn't be anymore. Just like the grocery store after he'd followed her there last month. Just like the library after he'd made a scene there last summer. The newspaper rustled from Jack's direction, but she didn't dare look his way. Any sign that she'd interacted with another man would set Caleb off. She kept her eyes down, focused on the swirling patterns in her coffee's cream. "Here you go, hon," Betty said, placing a steaming cup in front of Caleb. He barely acknowledged her, his attention still fixed on Madeline. The diner's usual comfortable atmosphere had vanished. Even the other customers seemed to sense the tension, their conversations growing quieter. The fluorescent lights suddenly felt too bright, too exposing. Madeline's purse sat beside her, heavy with secrets, the folded napkin and Jack's number burning like hot coals inside it. Caleb's coffee cup clinked against the counter as he set it down too hard. A few drops splashed over the rim, dark spots appearing on the white surface. The sound made Madeline jump slightly, and she saw his eyes narrow at her reaction. She knew that look. It was the same one he got right before things got bad. Before accidents happened. Before she had to call in sick to work because the bruises were too visible. Her ribs ached with the memory of his last outburst. "Everything okay over there?" Betty asked, her voice carrying a note of concern. She'd always been kind to Madeline, but even she couldn't help. Nobody could. Fine, Caleb answered for both of them, his voice carrying that dangerous edge that Madeline knew too well. Just checking on my girlfriend, making sure she's not getting into any trouble. The word girlfriend came out like a threat. Madeline's hands began to tremble so badly that she had to set her cup down. The coffee inside rippled with tiny waves, matching the tremors running through her body. The screech of metal against tile cut through the diner as Caleb suddenly pushed back from the counter. His face was dark with anger as he strode toward her table, each step deliberate and threatening. Madeline pressed herself back against the booth, trying to make herself smaller. He planted both hands on her table, leaning in close. His cologne, usually expensive and pleasant, now felt suffocating. "What are you doing here, Maddie?" he demanded, his voice low and controlled but filled with accusation. "You trying to run away from me again? Is that what this is?" Madeline forced herself to meet his gaze, knowing from experience that looking away would only make things worse. She struggled to keep her voice steady as she replied, "I'm just having coffee, Caleb. That's all." Madeline's fingers trembled as she watched Caleb turn towards the counter, his back momentarily to her. "I need another coffee," he growled at Betty, who nodded quickly and reached for the pot. This was her chance. Her only chance. With movements born from years of trying to be invisible, Madeline silently slid out of the booth. Her purse felt impossibly heavy against her shoulder, weighed down by more than just the folded napkin and Jack's number. It carried the weight of her decision, of everything she was about to leave behind. The diner's worn carpet muffled her footsteps as she moved toward the door. Each step felt like walking through deep water, her legs shaking so badly she worried they might give out. The exit sign glowed bright red above the door, like a beacon calling her to safety. 10 steps away. 9. 8. The quiet murmur of other diners' conversations covered the sound of her retreat. An elderly couple near the window were absorbed in their pie. A teenager scrolled through his phone, headphones firmly in place. No one was paying attention to her. No one except... From the corner of her eye, she caught Jack watching her, his newspaper lowered just enough to meet her gaze. He gave her the smallest of nods, and somehow that tiny gesture gave her strength. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. 7 steps. 6. 5. The coffee pot clinked against Caleb's cup as Betty refilled it. "Sugar's right there," Betty said, her voice carrying across the diner. Madeline heard the rustle of paper packets, knew Caleb would be occupied for a few more precious seconds. 4 steps. 3. Her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. The door was right there, just within reach. The setting sun painted the glass orange and pink, promising freedom on the other side. 2 steps. 1. Madeline pushed through the door, the little bell above it betraying her with a cheerful chime. The evening air hit her face, cool and fresh compared to the stuffy diner. She heard the scrape of a chair behind her, followed by Caleb's voice. "Maddie?" She didn't look back. Her feet carried her forward, past the neat row of cars in the parking lot. Her own car was there, but the keys were in her purse, and she didn't have time to fumble for them. Besides, Caleb would expect her to go for the car. "Madeline!" His voice was closer now, sharp with anger. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" The sound of his rage sent electricity through her veins. Her walk became a jog, then broke into a full run. Her shoes slapped against the asphalt as she ran past her car, past the diner's neon sign, toward the darkening street beyond. "Get back here!" Caleb roared, and she heard his heavy footsteps behind her. Madeline ran faster, her purse bouncing against her hip. She had no destination in mind, no plan beyond getting away. The piece of paper with Jack's number burned in her purse like a lifeline, but she couldn't stop to reach for it now. All she could do was run, her lungs burning, her legs pumping, carrying her away from the man who had controlled her life for so long. The sound of her name echoed off the buildings around her, Caleb's voice growing more distant with each step she took. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Looking back meant hesitating, and hesitating meant being caught. So she ran into the gathering dusk, leaving behind everything she knew, terrified but somehow feeling more alive than she had in years. The shelter's warm yellow lights spilled onto the sidewalk, like a gentle embrace. Madeline stood in the shadows, catching her breath, her legs still trembling from running. The building was small and unassuming, with flower boxes in the windows and a simple wooden sign that read, New Hope Women's Shelter. She'd passed this place dozens of times before, but had never really noticed it. Now, it felt like a lighthouse in a storm. Through the window, she could see comfortable chairs and soft lighting, so different from the harsh fluorescence she'd expected. Taking a deep breath, Madeline pushed open the heavy wooden door. A small bell chimed softly overhead, and the scent of fresh coffee and vanilla candles wrapped around her like a warm blanket. The front room was cozy, with worn but clean furniture and walls painted in soothing shades of blue. Behind a desk sat a woman with silver hair and kind eyes. She looked up from her paperwork and smiled, but didn't rush to speak. Instead, she waited, giving Madeline time to find her voice. Madeline's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. I need a place to stay. The woman nodded, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. I'm Margaret, she said, her voice gentle. Would you like some tea while we talk? Madeline nodded, sinking into a chair near the desk. Her purse felt heavy in her lap, and she clutched it tight, like it contained all that was left of her world. In a way, it did. Margaret brought her a steaming mug of chamomile tea, then sat down with a simple form. We'll keep this brief, she assured Madeline. Just the basics for now. The questions were straightforward. Her name, age, any immediate medical needs. Margaret didn't push when Madeline hesitated over certain details, just nodded and moved on. No judgment, no pressure for the full story. We have a bed available, Margaret said, standing up. Let me show you where you can rest. The shelter was larger inside than it appeared from the street. Margaret led her down a hallway lined with doors, each numbered simply. Some rooms had soft voices or quiet music drifting from behind them. Others were silent. This is your room, Margaret said, opening door number 7. Inside was a single bed with fresh linens, a small dresser, and a chair by the window. Simple, but clean and safe. The bathroom is shared just down the hall. There's a kitchen if you're hungry, and someone is at the front desk all night if you need anything. Madeline stepped inside, letting the reality of her situation sink in. She was really here. She'd really left. Thank you, she whispered. Margaret smiled. Get some rest. You're safe here. When the door closed softly behind Margaret, Madeline sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firm, but comfortable, the blanket soft under her fingers. A small lamp cast a warm glow over the room. Her hands shook as she opened her purse, pulling out the crumpled piece of paper with Jack's number. She smoothed it out carefully, staring at the hastily written digits. The memory of his gentle voice in the diner, so unexpected from someone who looked so intimidating, filled her mind. Should she call? Could she trust him? But he'd been the first person in years to notice she needed help, to actually do something about it. Madeline pulled out her phone, her finger hovering over the keypad. The numbers on the paper seemed to blur as tears filled her eyes. Taking a deep breath, she began to dial. Jack sat in the dimly lit back room of the motorcycle club, surrounded by familiar faces. The walls were covered with old photographs and memorabilia, telling stories of their shared past. But tonight, they weren't discussing rides or reminiscing about old times. Instead, maps and phone numbers were spread across the wooden table as they planned their next outreach program. "We need more safe houses," Sarah, one of the newer members, was saying. She'd joined the group after they'd helped her escape an abusive marriage. "The shelters are always full, and sometimes people need more than just a temporary bed." Jack nodded, his weathered hands tracing routes on the map. His leather vest creaked as he leaned forward, the patches and pins catching the light. The other members, 6 of them tonight, listened intently. This wasn't the Hells Angels most people imagined. These were the ones who'd chosen a different path, who decided to use their strength to protect instead of intimidate. The vibration of his phone cut through his thoughts. When he glanced at the screen, his heart skipped a beat. It was an unknown number, but something told him who it might be. "Excuse me," he said, standing up. The wooden chair scraped against the floor as he pushed it back. "I need to take this." The others nodded, understanding in their eyes. They'd all been part of similar situations before. Jack stepped into the quiet hallway, his boots echoing on the hardwood floor. He pressed the answer button, keeping his voice soft and calm. "Hello?" There was a pause on the other end, then a shaky breath. Is this Jack? From the diner?" "Yes, it's me." He leaned against the wall, trying to make his imposing frame seem less threatening, even though she couldn't see him. "Are you safe?" "I'm at a shelter." Madeline's voice was barely above a whisper. "New Hope. On Cedar Street. I left him. After you gave me your number, he came to the diner and I couldn't stay anymore." "You did the right thing," Jack assured her, his deep voice gentle. "New Hope is a good place. Margaret runs a tight ship there." Another pause. "I wanted to thank you. For the napkin and the note. I don't know what I would have done if—" "Hey, it's okay," Jack interrupted softly, hearing the tremor in her voice. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you got out." He could hear her trying to steady her breathing. "What do I do now? He knows where I work, where I shop. He'll find me." "Not if we can help it," Jack said firmly. "Listen, I work with a group. We help people in situations like yours. Would you be willing to meet tomorrow? We can talk about your options, make some plans. Somewhere public, wherever you feel comfortable." "The diner?" Madeline suggested after a moment. "Around 10 in the morning? It's usually quiet then." "The diner works fine," Jack agreed. "I'll be there. And Madeline? Try to get some rest tonight. You're safe at New Hope. Margaret's an old friend. She knows how to handle situations like this." "Thank you," she whispered again, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll see you tomorrow." The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of the motorcycle club's meeting room. Jack stood at the head of the worn wooden table, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the floor. Around him sat 7 members of his reformed Hells Angels group, their leather vests adorned with patches that told stories of their past lives. "Her name is Madeline," Jack said, his deep voice filling the quiet room. "She needs our help getting away from an abusive boyfriend." Sarah, sitting near the window, nodded immediately. Her own experiences made her particularly sympathetic to such cases. "What's the situation?" "Classic control setup," Jack explained, running a hand through his graying beard. "The boyfriend, Caleb, knows all her usual spots. Work, shopping, friends. She's at New Hope right now, but that's temporary. Mike, a burly man with tattoo-covered arms, leaned forward. "Not to be that guy, Jack, but are we sure about this? We've been trying to clean up our image, getting involved in domestic disputes." "That's exactly why we should help," Jack interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "Look at us. People see our patches, our bikes, our history. They expect the worst. But we can use that reputation, that strength, to protect people instead of scaring them." The room fell silent as his words sank in. These men and women had all walked dark paths before finding their way to redemption. They understood the power of second chances. "I've got a place," Linda spoke up from the corner. She was in her 50s, with silver streaks in her dark hair and kind eyes that had seen too much. "My aunt's old house on Maple Grove. It's off the grid, well-maintained, and no one would think to look there." Jack nodded gratefully. "Perfect. We'll need to set up security protocols, regular check-ins, emergency contacts." "I can handle the paperwork," Sarah offered. "Get her a new phone, temporary ID if needed." One by one, the members contributed their ideas and resources. What had started as uncertainty transformed into determination. These former outlaws, who had once inspired fear, were now channeling their skills into protection and support. Later that morning, Jack pulled up to Linda's safe house in his pickup truck, Madeline sitting quietly in the passenger seat. The house was a modest two-story structure, set back from the road and partially hidden by old oak trees. White curtains hung in the windows, and flower boxes added a homey touch that belied its serious purpose. "It's not much," Jack said softly as he helped Madeline with her small bag of belongings. "But it's secure. Linda lives just down the street, and there's always someone from our group nearby." Madeline stepped into the house, taking in the clean, simple furnishings. The living room was cozy, with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. The kitchen was stocked with basic supplies, and upstairs she found a bedroom with fresh linens and a window overlooking a small garden. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Her hands clutched the strap of her purse, but her shoulders had lost some of their tension. Jack stood in the doorway, his imposing figure somehow less intimidating now. "You don't have to thank me. Just focus on taking care of yourself. Sarah will be by later with some supplies, and to help you get settled." For the first time since leaving the diner, Madeline felt something shift inside her chest. A small spark of possibility, of freedom. The fear wasn't gone, but here, in this unexpected sanctuary provided by these unexpected guardians, she could see a path forward. Caleb paced his apartment like a caged animal, kicking furniture out of his way. The morning light cast harsh shadows across his face as he dialed Madeline's number for the 20th time. Each unanswered ring fueled his rage. "Where are you?" he snarled into the voicemail. "You think you can just leave after everything I've done for you?" He hurled the phone across the room, where it bounced off the wall and landed on the carpet. The apartment felt empty without her. Her absence mocked him from every corner. The neat stack of books she always kept by the couch, the yellow coffee mug she used every morning, the vanilla-scented candle she loved to light in the evenings. Each item sparked a new wave of fury. Caleb stormed into the bedroom, yanking open drawers and closet doors. Some of her clothes were missing, along with her emergency bag. His hands shook as he slammed the drawers shut, the wood splintering under his force. "You ungrateful," he muttered, running his fingers through his disheveled hair. After all this time, after everything. He grabbed the framed photo of them from the nightstand, a happy moment at the beach last summer. His grip tightened until the glass cracked, creating a spider web across Madeline's smiling face. A thin line of blood appeared on his palm, where the glass cut him, but he barely noticed. Back in the living room, Caleb retrieved his phone and started calling her friends. None of them answered. They'd stopped picking up months ago when he'd driven them away. He left threatening messages, promising consequences if they were hiding her. The morning turned to afternoon as Caleb's rage simmered. He sat at the kitchen table, methodically listing places she might have gone. Her parents lived too far, away. She had no close friends left in town. Her workplace would be too obvious. His eyes landed on her purse from the diner, the one she'd left behind in her rush to leave. He dumped its contents onto the table, searching for clues. Receipts, loose change, old grocery lists. Nothing useful. But then he noticed something odd. A crumpled napkin with the word "help" written in her handwriting. Caleb's face darkened. Someone had helped her escape. Someone had interfered in their relationship. His fist came down hard on the table, sending items scattering across the floor. He grabbed his keys and jacket, heading out to drive around town. The familiar streets yielded no sign of her. He checked her usual spots: the library, the park where she liked to walk, the coffee shop she frequented. Nothing. As he drove past a community bulletin board, something caught his eye. A simple flyer for New Hope Women's Shelter, with its address and phone number prominently displayed. Caleb slammed on the brakes, causing the car behind him to honk angrily. He ripped the flyer from the board, his hands trembling with barely contained fury. "So that's where you're hiding," he muttered, crumpling the paper in his fist. "You think some shelter can keep you safe from me?" Standing there on the sidewalk, Caleb made a silent vow. He would find her, no matter what it took. And anyone who tried to stop him, anyone who dared to help her, would regret getting involved. His fingers traced the shelter's address on the crumpled flyer as a cold smile spread across his face. The morning sun filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns on the hardwood floor of the safe house. Madeline sat cross-legged on the window seat, cradling a steaming cup of chamomile tea. 3 days had passed since she'd arrived, and for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe freely. The house itself was a modest 2-story building, tucked away on a quiet street lined with maple trees. Inside, warm colors and comfortable furniture created a welcoming atmosphere that helped ease her constant anxiety. The kitchen, with its worn but clean countertops and cheerful yellow walls, became her favorite refuge. She spent hours there, rediscovering her love of cooking, something Caleb had slowly taken away from her. Each day, Jack would stop by, his massive frame somehow less intimidating now. He never stayed long, always respecting her space, but his presence brought a sense of security she hadn't expected. Sometimes he'd bring groceries or books, leaving them on the kitchen counter with a gentle nod and a quiet, "You doing okay today?" Today's visit had been particularly meaningful. Jack had brought her a small potted lavender plant, remembering she'd mentioned how much she loved the scent. "Thought it might brighten up your window," he'd said, his gruff voice softened by kindness. The simple gesture had brought tears to her eyes. Madeline walked through the house, trailing, her fingers along the walls. In the living room, afternoon light spilled across the comfortable old sofa where she'd spent hours reading. A bookshelf stood in the corner, filled with worn paperbacks, mysteries, romances, and self-help books left by previous residents. She'd already finished 2 novels, something she hadn't done in years. Caleb had always criticized her reading habits, calling them a waste of time. The kitchen beckoned, and she found herself drawn to the fresh bread she'd baked that morning. The simple act of kneading dough had been therapeutic, helping her work through the tangled mess of emotions she carried. The house filled with the homey scent, and for a while she felt normal again. In the afternoon, Madeline ventured into the small backyard. A wooden fence enclosed the space, offering privacy and security. Bird feeders hung from tree branches, attracting cheerful chickadees and cardinals. She settled into an old garden chair, watching their aerial dance with quiet appreciation. The peaceful surroundings allowed her mind to wander, but not to dark places as it usually did. Instead, she found herself thinking about possibilities, maybe taking some online classes, or finding a new job where Caleb couldn't find her. Simple dreams, but ones that had seemed impossible just days ago. Walking the perimeter of the house, Madeline admired the well-tended flower beds. Purple coneflowers and black-eyed Susans swayed in the gentle breeze. She picked a few flowers, arranging them in a small vase on her bedside table. The simple act of decorating her space, of making choices without fear of criticism or anger, felt revolutionary. Yet even in these peaceful moments, shadows of fear lingered. Every unexpected sound made her jump. She checked the locks multiple times each day and kept her phone close at hand. Caleb's presence haunted her thoughts like a dark cloud on the horizon. But for the first time, that cloud didn't dominate her entire sky. She had found a pocket of peace, a space where she could begin to remember who she was before the abuse began to shape her. Standing in the garden, watching butterflies flit between flowers, Madeline felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Hope, mixed with the first tentative taste of independence. It was fragile, this new feeling, but it was there, growing stronger with each passing day. The day started like any other at the safe house. Madeline hummed softly as she watered her lavender plant, watching drops of water sparkle in the morning light. The familiar scent calmed her nerves as she went about her morning routine, tidying up the kitchen after breakfast. A car door slammed outside. Her hands froze mid-motion as she dried a plate. Something about that sound, sharp, angry, familiar, made her stomach clench. Before she could process the feeling, heavy footsteps thundered up the porch steps. The front door burst open with a crash that shook the walls. "You think you can hide from me?" Caleb's voice boomed through the house. The plate slipped from Madeline's trembling fingers, shattering on the kitchen floor. She stumbled backward, her breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be happening. The safe house was supposed to be secret. Secure. Caleb stormed into the kitchen, his face twisted with rage. His normally neat appearance was disheveled, shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. "Did you really think I wouldn't find you?" he snarled. Madeline's back hit the counter. Her fingers gripped the edge so hard her knuckles turned white. How did you— You're not as clever as you think," he spat, taking another step closer. "Following you was easy, and now you're going to come home where you belong." The kitchen suddenly felt too small, too confining. Madeline's eyes darted to the doorway, but Caleb blocked her escape route. Her throat closed up, memories of past confrontations flooding back, the screaming, the threats, the pain. "I'm not coming back," she whispered, but her voice shook. Caleb's laugh was cold and sharp. "You don't have a choice." He swept his arm across the counter, sending her morning coffee cup crashing to the floor. "Look at you playing house here. You think you can make it on your own? You're nothing without me." Madeline flinched at each word, each one hitting like a physical blow. Her legs felt weak, her mind clouded with terror. She wanted to run, to fight back, to scream, but her body wouldn't respond. Years of conditioning had taught her to freeze, to make herself small, to wait for the storm to pass. "You ungrateful little—" Caleb advanced, raising his hand. The back door burst open. Jack's massive frame filled the doorway, with 3 other bikers right behind him. Their presence seemed to fill the entire kitchen, but they moved with careful control. Without a word, they positioned themselves between Madeline and Caleb. "Step back," Jack said, his voice low and steady. His eyes never left Caleb's face. "This isn't your business," Caleb snarled, but there was a slight waver in his voice. "She's my girlfriend. She's coming home with me." "No," Jack replied simply. "She's not." "You can't stop me." Caleb's face reddened. "You think I'm scared of you and your little biker gang?" Jack didn't raise his voice or move aggressively. He simply stood there, a mountain of calm strength. "Leave now, Caleb. This isn't going to end the way you want it to." But Caleb planted his feet, his hands clenching into fists. "I'm not going anywhere without her." The tension in the kitchen thickened. Behind Jack's protective wall, Madeline pressed herself against the counter, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The morning sunlight that had seemed so peaceful just minutes ago now cast harsh shadows across the scene, highlighting the rage on Caleb's face as he refused to back down. Jack took a measured step forward, his presence commanding but not threatening. Morning light caught the silver in his beard as he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "I know that rage you're feeling, Caleb," Jack said quietly. "That need to control everything and everyone around you. I lived with it for years." Caleb's jaw clenched, but something in Jack's tone made him pause. The other bikers remained still, forming a protective semicircle around Madeline. "You think violence makes you strong?" Jack continued, his eyes never leaving Caleb's face. "I used to think that too. Spent 15 years of my life proving how tough I was, how nobody could push me around." He absently touched one of his faded tattoos. "You know what it got me? Nothing but emptiness and pain." "This isn't about you," Caleb spat, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "Maybe not. But I've been where you are." Jack's voice grew softer. "I remember the day I finally understood what my anger was doing to others. There was this woman, reminded me of my sister. I'd scared her so badly she was shaking." He shook his head slowly. "That's when I knew I had to change." Madeline watched from behind the wall of bikers as Caleb's shoulders tensed, then slightly dropped. His fists remained clenched, but confusion flickered across his face. "It's not weak to walk away," Jack said. "It takes more strength to control your anger than to let it control you. I learned that the hard way." The kitchen fell silent, except for the steady drip of the faucet. Sunlight caught the broken pieces of coffee cup on the floor, scattering tiny reflections across the walls. "You don't understand," Caleb growled, but his voice cracked slightly. "She's mine. I take care of her." "No," Jack replied firmly. "She's her own person, and right now she's choosing to be free of you." Caleb's gaze darted to Madeline, who stood straighter despite her trembling hands. His face darkened again, the momentary vulnerability replaced by fury. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing toward the door. "You think you can hide behind these thugs forever?" His eyes locked onto Madeline. "I'll be watching. You'll see. You need me." He turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The sound of his car engine roaring to life filled the air, then faded as he drove away. Jack turned to Madeline, his expression softening. "You're safe for now," he said gently, "but we'll need to be careful. My guys will take turns keeping watch. Make sure he doesn't try anything." Madeline nodded, her legs finally giving out as she sank into a kitchen chair. The morning's peaceful routine felt like it had happened in another lifetime. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Jack and his companions. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come when you did." Jack pulled up a chair across from her. "We'll need to be extra vigilant for a while. Men like Caleb, they don't give up easily, but you're not alone anymore." The other bikers moved quietly through the house, checking windows and doors, while Madeline sat in her chair, trying to process everything that had just happened. The broken coffee cup still lay scattered across the floor, a reminder of how quickly peace could shatter, but also how unexpected help could arrive just when it was needed most. Madeline sat at the kitchen table long after Caleb had left, staring at her trembling hands. The morning sun streamed through the window, warming her skin, but inside she felt cold. Empty. Her coffee cup sat untouched, growing cold like the knot in her stomach. She thought of the little moments, the times when Caleb had been kind, brought her flowers, or made her laugh. The good memories fought against the bad ones in her mind, making her question everything. Had she done the right thing by leaving? Maybe if she'd tried harder, been more understanding. The weight of guilt pressed down on her shoulders. Caleb's words echoed in her head. "You need me?" Part of her wondered if he was right. She'd been with him for so long, built her whole life around him. Now everything felt uncertain, like walking on shifting sand. Her eyes burned with unshed tears as she remembered the first time they met. He'd been so charming, so attentive. She'd felt special, chosen. How had it turned into this? The thought of him alone in their apartment, probably angry and hurt, made her chest tight with guilt. "He's probably not eating properly," she whispered to herself, wrapping her arms around her middle. "He always forgets to do the laundry when I'm not there." The familiar urge to fix everything, to make it better, washed over her. It would be so easy to go back, to slip into old patterns, to pretend the bad times weren't so bad, that the good times made up for everything else. She touched her arm where fading bruises still marked her skin, hidden beneath her sleeve. The memory of how she got them crashed through her attempts at justification. Still, the guilt persisted, mixing with fear and uncertainty until she could barely breathe. "What am I doing?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be alone." Jack, who had been quietly cleaning up the broken coffee cup pieces, noticed her distress. He set aside the dustpan and pulled up a chair beside her, careful to give her space. His presence was steady, grounding. "You're not alone," he said softly. "And what you're feeling? That guilt? It's normal. But it's not your job to fix him or take care of him anymore." Madeline wiped at her eyes with shaking hands. I keep thinking about the good times. Maybe if I'd been more patient." "No," Jack said firmly but gently. "Listen to me. You didn't cause this. You didn't deserve any of it. The good times don't make up for the abuse." His words hit home, and Madeline's tears finally spilled over. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I don't know who I am without him anymore." "You're strong," Jack said, his voice full of quiet, conviction. "Stronger than you know. It took courage to write that note in the diner. It took courage to leave. And you'll find out who you are. Day by day. Choice by choice." Madeline looked up at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. He wasn't judging her, wasn't pushing her. He was just there, offering support without demands. "You can build a new life," he continued. "One where you're safe, where you get to make your own choices. It won't be easy, but you don't have to do it alone." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the safe house's living room as Madeline and Jack sat on opposite ends of a worn leather couch. The tension from earlier had eased, replaced by a comfortable quiet. Jack's large frame seemed less intimidating now, his presence oddly reassuring. "I wasn't always like this," Jack said, breaking the silence. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a faded tattoo of a skull. "Got this when I was 17. Thought it made me tough." Madeline studied the artwork, noticing how it was partially covered by newer, more intricate designs. What happened? My old man walked out when I was 12, Jack said, his voice low and measured. Mom worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. I was angry. Started hanging with the wrong crowd. He paused, running a hand through his beard. The angels found me when I was lost. They became the family I thought I needed. Madeline wrapped her arms around herself, remembering her own lonely teenage years. Did they force you to do things? No, Jack shook his head. That's the thing about anger. Nobody has to force you. You do it all on your own. He traced the skull tattoo with his finger. First time I hurt someone, I felt powerful, like I was in control for once. The room grew quieter, only the distant sound of traffic filtering through the windows. Madeline watched Jack's face, seeing the pain of old memories etched in the lines around his eyes. What changed? She asked softly. Met an old man at a gas station, Jack said, a slight smile touching his lips. I was trying to shake him down for protection money. Instead of being scared, he looked at me like he saw right through the tough guy act, offered me coffee and told me about his son who died in a gang fight. Jack stood up, walking to the window. He said something I never forgot. Son, that anger you're carrying, it's not protecting you. It's eating you alive. He turned back to Madeline. Took me years to understand what he meant. Madeline felt tears prick her eyes, understanding the weight of transformation. How did you leave the angels? Wasn't easy, Jack admitted. But I found others who wanted to change too. We started helping people instead of hurting them. He gestured around the safe house. This is part of that change. The afternoon light was fading, and Jack suggested they take a walk to clear their heads. The nearby park was quiet, with only a few people walking their dogs or jogging along the paths. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. As they walked, Madeline found herself studying Jack's profile. The man she'd initially feared in the diner seemed like a different person now. His steps were measured to match her shorter stride, his presence protective rather than threatening. Sometimes, she said, watching a pair of sparrows hop along the path, I look at people and wonder about their stories. How many others are carrying pain they can't show? Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. That's why we can't judge by appearances. Everyone's fighting their own battles. They stopped near a small pond, watching the water ripple in the breeze. Madeline felt something shift inside her, a wall beginning to crumble. The man standing beside her wasn't the monster she'd first imagined. He was someone who understood pain, who'd walked through darkness and found his way back to light. Thank you, she said quietly, for sharing your story with me. Jack's response was a gentle nod, his silent understanding more comforting than any words could be. The afternoon sun warmed Madeline's face as she sat on a checkered blanket in the park. Jack had brought a simple picnic lunch, sandwiches, fruit, and bottles of water. She watched as children played on the nearby playground, their laughter carrying on the breeze. I used to dream about having kids someday, Madeline said, picking at the crust of her sandwich. But with Caleb, she let the thought trail off, not needing to finish. Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. Dreams don't have expiration dates, you know. There's still time. A mother walked past, pushing a stroller, smiling at her baby. Madeline felt a flutter of possibility in her chest, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. I don't even know where to start, she admitted. Everything with Caleb. It's like I forgot how to want things for myself. Start small, Jack suggested, reaching for an apple. What's something you've always wanted to do but couldn't? Madeline thought for a moment. I used to paint. Nothing special, just landscapes and stuff. Caleb said it was a waste of time. That's not small, Jack said, his voice gentle. That's your passion. He took that from you. They watched as a group of ducks waddled past, heading for the pond. Madeline felt the tension in her shoulders ease. Here, in this moment, Caleb's angry voice seemed far away. "Maybe I could take classes," she said softly, as if testing the words. "There's a community center nearby that offers art lessons." Jack's face lit up. "See? That's a start. What else?" As the afternoon wore on, they walked along the park's winding paths. Madeline found herself sharing more dreams, going back to school, maybe starting her own business someday. Each possibility she voiced made her feel stronger, more real. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," she said, stopping to watch a butterfly land on a nearby flower. "Like, I'm actually allowed to have a future." "You're not just allowed," Jack said. "You deserve it." They found a bench overlooking the pond, where they sat and watched the sun begin its descent. The water reflected the golden light, creating patterns that reminded Madeline of her old paintings. "I think I'm ready," she said after a while. "Ready to really start over." Jack turned to her, his expression serious but kind. "That's the bravest thing you could say." As evening approached, Jack drove her back to the safe house. The car ride was quiet but comfortable. Madeline watched the familiar streets pass by, seeing them with new eyes. Each turn brought her closer to her sanctuary, but it no longer felt like hiding. It felt like choosing. They pulled up to the house just as the first stars were appearing. The porch light was on, casting a warm glow over the front steps. Jack walked her to the door, his tall frame casting a long shadow. Madeline turned to face him, finding it easier now to meet his gaze. In his eyes, she saw not the intimidating biker from the diner, but a friend who had helped her rediscover her strength. Their eyes met and held, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. No words were needed. They both knew something had shifted today. Hope, bright and unexpected, had taken root in Madeline's heart. With a small smile, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, carrying with her the promise of tomorrow. The morning sun cast long shadows across the safe house's front yard. Jack stood at the window, his broad shoulders tense as he watched the street. Behind him, several members of his Hell's Angels group sat quietly in the living room, their usual intimidating presence softened by concern. "He'll come," Jack said, his voice low. "Caleb's not the type to let go easily." Madeline sat on the couch, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee. The past few days of peace had given her strength, but the knowledge that Caleb was out there, growing more desperate, weighed heavily on her mind. "I should have known he'd find me again," she said, staring into her cup. One of Jack's friends, a woman named Sarah with silver-streaked hair, reached over and squeezed Madeline's hand. "That's what men like him do, but you're not alone anymore." The sound of tires on gravel made everyone freeze. Jack's stance shifted, becoming more alert as he peered through the curtains. "That's his car." Madeline's heart hammered in her chest, but she stood up, smoothing her hands over her jeans. The fear was still there, but it felt different now, less paralyzing, more like a reminder of what she was fighting against. The front door burst open with a bang that made the windows rattle. Caleb stood in the doorway, his face twisted with rage. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the group of bikers before landing on Madeline. "So this is where you've been hiding," he snarled. "With these criminals?" Jack stepped forward, positioning, himself between Caleb and Madeline. "You need to leave." "Stay out of this," Caleb spat. "This is between me and her." He tried to move around Jack, but two other bikers stood up, forming a protective wall. "No," Madeline said, her voice stronger than she expected. This isn't just between us anymore. She moved past Jack, ignoring his concerned look. Standing face to face with Caleb, she felt something shift inside her. The man who had terrorized her for so long suddenly seemed smaller, less powerful. "You think these people can protect you?" Caleb's voice shook with anger. "You belong with me, Madeline. You know that." "I don't belong to anyone," Madeline replied. Her hands were trembling, but her voice remained steady. "I'm done being afraid, done letting you control my life." Caleb took a threatening step forward, but Jack's presence beside Madeline made him hesitate. The room crackled with tension as Caleb's gaze darted between them. "This isn't over," Caleb growled, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "You can't just walk away from me." "Yes, I can," Madeline said, "and I am. Right now." Jack moved slightly closer to Madeline, his voice low and dangerous. "This is your last warning, Caleb. Leave her alone, or you'll have more than just me to deal with." The other bikers stood silently, their presence a clear message. Caleb's face flushed with anger and humiliation as he looked around the room, realizing he was outnumbered and outmatched. Madeline held her ground, meeting his gaze steadily. In that moment, she saw him clearly, not as the powerful, controlling force he'd always seemed, but as a desperate, angry man who had no more power over her. "We're done, Caleb," she said firmly. "Don't come back." The tension in the room suddenly shattered at the sound of sirens. Blue and red lights flashed through the windows, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Caleb's face twisted into a cruel smile. "Looks like someone called the cops," he said, stepping back toward the door. "Wonder what they'll think about a bunch of Hell's Angels threatening an innocent man?" Madeline's heart sank as she realized what was happening. Outside, police cars surrounded the house, their doors opening as officers emerged with hands on their weapons. "Everyone stay calm," Jack said quietly, his voice steady despite the situation. He turned to his friends. "No sudden movements." The front door burst open again, this time filled with uniformed officers, their weapons drawn. "Hands where we can see them!" one shouted. Jack immediately raised his hands, his movements slow and deliberate. The other bikers followed suit, their faces grim but composed. Madeline watched in horror as the officers moved through the room, their focus primarily on Jack and his friends. "Officer," Madeline stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Please, they were just trying to help me. "Ma'am, step back," an officer ordered, cutting her off. He turned to Jack. "We received a report of gang activity and possible assault. Are you Jack Moore?" Jack nodded calmly. "Yes, sir." "Known associate of the Hell's Angels?" "Former associate," Jack corrected quietly. "I haven't been active in years." The officer pulled out handcuffs. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "No, please," Madeline protested, moving forward again. "He was protecting me. Caleb." She turned to point at her ex-boyfriend, but he had already slipped away during the chaos. "Ma'am, we'll take your statement later," the officer said, securing the cuffs around Jack's wrists. "Right now, we need to sort this situation out." Madeline watched helplessly as Jack was led toward the door. His face remained calm, but she could see the worry in his eyes, not for himself, but for her. As he passed by, he spoke softly. "Stay strong, Madeline. You've got this." The other bikers were being questioned, their IDs checked, but it was clear Jack was the main target. Through the window, Madeline saw him being placed in the back of a police car. Her hands trembled as she wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold and alone. Sarah, who had managed to avoid being detained, came to stand beside her. "Don't worry, honey. We'll sort this out." But Madeline could barely hear her over the rushing in her ears. Everything had happened so fast, from finally standing up to Caleb to watching Jack being taken away in handcuffs. The one person who had shown her true kindness, who had helped her find her strength, was gone. She sank onto the couch as the police continued their work, taking statements and photographs. The house that had felt like a sanctuary now felt empty and exposed. Through the window, she watched the police car carrying Jack pull away, its lights still flashing in the growing darkness. Despite her fear and heartbreak, something inside her remained firm. Jack's words echoed in her mind. Stay strong. She had come too far to give up now. Even without him here, she would not let herself fall back into the pattern of fear and helplessness that had defined her life with Caleb. Madeline wiped away a tear and straightened her shoulders. She would find a way to help Jack, just as he had helped her. But first she had to stay strong and face whatever came next on her own. Madeline sat in her small room at the safe house, staring at her phone. 24 hours had passed since Jack's arrest, and she hadn't heard a word. The silence was deafening. Outside her window, rain tapped against the glass, matching her gloomy mood. She picked up the newspaper Sarah had brought her earlier. The headline made her stomach turn. Former Hells Angel arrested in domestic dispute. The article painted Jack as a dangerous criminal, completely ignoring the truth of what had happened. Madeline crumpled the paper and tossed it aside. "You should eat something," Sarah said, appearing in the doorway with a steaming bowl of soup. The older woman's kind face showed concern. "You haven't touched food since yesterday." Madeline shook her head. "I can't. This is all my fault." She wrapped her arms around herself, fighting back tears. "If I hadn't asked for help, if I hadn't written that note in the diner—" "Don't you dare blame yourself," Sarah said firmly, setting the soup down on the bedside table. "Jack knew exactly what he was doing when he chose to help you. We all did." But the guilt wouldn't leave. Madeline got up and paced the small room, her thoughts racing. What if they keep him locked up? What if Caleb pressed charges? I should have known better than to trust someone with his background. The words tumbled out, bitter and full of self-recrimination. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her expression patient. "Jack's past isn't who he is now. You know that better than anyone." "But what if I was wrong?" Madeline stopped pacing, her voice barely a whisper. "What if I just traded one dangerous man for another?" "Is that what you really believe?" Sarah asked quietly. Madeline thought about Jack's gentle voice in the diner, the way he'd never pushed or pressured her. She remembered how he'd faced down Caleb without violence, choosing words over fists. No, Jack wasn't dangerous, at least not anymore. The phone in her hand suddenly buzzed, making her jump. An unknown number flashed on the screen. With trembling fingers, she answered. "Hello? Madeline?" Jack's familiar voice came through, slightly tinny but unmistakable. "It's me." Her knees went weak with relief, and she sank onto the bed. "Jack, are you okay? I've been so worried." "I'm fine," he assured her, his voice calm and steady. "Just dealing with some paperwork and old records. My lawyer says they can't hold me. There's no evidence of any crime." "I'm so sorry," Madeline burst out, the words she'd been holding back spilling forth. "This is all because of me. If I hadn't—" "Stop right there," Jack interrupted gently. "Listen to me. Everything that happened was my choice. I knew the risks when I decided to help you, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat." Tears rolled down Madeline's cheeks. "But your reputation, your freedom, are worth it if it means helping someone escape abuse," he finished firmly. "The lawyer says I'll be out by tomorrow morning, and once I am, we'll keep doing what we've been doing, helping people who need it. Even after all this? Especially after all this, Jack said, determination clear in his voice. No matter what it costs me personally, I won't stop helping others find their way out of darkness. You taught me that it's worth it. Sarah squeezed Madeline's shoulder supportively as she wiped away her tears. Through the phone, she could hear the guards announcing that time was up. I have to go, Jack said quickly. But remember, you're stronger than you know, Madeline. Everything's going to be fine. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete steps of the county jail as Madeline waited, nervously, shifting her weight from foot to foot. Her hands clutched a paper coffee cup that had long since gone cold. She'd arrived an hour early, too anxious to stay at the safe house any longer. The heavy metal doors creaked open, and Jack emerged, squinting in the bright sunlight. He looked tired but relieved, wearing the same leather vest and jeans from 2 days ago. His usual intimidating presence seemed softer somehow, more vulnerable after his time behind bars. Madeline's heart skipped a beat when she saw him. She set down her coffee cup on a nearby bench and took a tentative step forward, unsure of how to greet him. Jack? He turned toward her voice, and his weathered face broke into a gentle smile. You didn't have to come, he said, but the warmth in his eyes told her he was glad she had. Of course I did, Madeline replied, her voice stronger than she expected. After everything you've done for me. Jack descended the steps slowly, as if carrying an invisible weight. When he reached her, he stopped, maintaining a respectful distance. How are you holding up? I should be asking you that, she said, studying his face. The dark circles under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. Are you okay? Did they treat you all right? He shrugged, his massive shoulders rising and falling. It wasn't my first time in a cell. Won't be my last, probably. Helping people like you comes with risks. Madeline felt the familiar surge of guilt. Jack, Don't, he said firmly but kindly. We've been through this. My choices are my own. They stood in awkward silence for a moment, the morning traffic creating a distant hum around them. Finally, Madeline spoke. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. Everything feels uncertain. Jack nodded thoughtfully. That's normal. Change always feels that way at first. He gestured to a nearby bench, and they both sat down. But you're not alone anymore. What about Caleb? She asked, voicing her deepest fear. He's still out there. He is, Jack acknowledged. But so are we. So is the whole community that's ready to support you. He turned to face her directly. You've already taken the hardest step, choosing to leave. Everything else we'll handle together. Madeline felt tears welling up in her eyes. I'm not used to having people on my side, she whispered. Well, get used to it, Jack said with a small smile. Because that's not changing anytime soon. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the same napkin she'd written help on in the diner. I kept this, to remind me why we do what we do. Madeline stared at the napkin, remembering how desperate and alone she'd felt that day. I was so scared, she admitted. And now? She thought for a moment. Still scared, she said honestly. But different. Like maybe being scared doesn't mean I'm weak. That's right, Jack said. He carefully folded the napkin and handed it to her. Being scared just means you're human. Being brave means facing that fear anyway. The morning sun had risen higher now, warming their faces. Madeline looked at the napkin in her hands, then at Jack. So what do we do now? Jack's expression softened. We move forward, he said simply. One day at a time, We build a life where fear doesn't get to call the shots anymore. 3 months after Jack's release, the small office buzzed with quiet activity. Madeline sat behind a simple desk, arranging pamphlets and information packets about domestic abuse support services. Sunlight streamed through the windows, warming the cozy space that had become her second home. The walls were painted a soft blue, chosen specifically to create a calming atmosphere. Pictures of peaceful landscapes hung on the walls, and comfortable chairs invited visitors to sit and feel safe. It wasn't fancy, but it felt right. "I've got another referral," Jack said, poking his head through the doorway. His massive frame filled the space, but his presence no longer intimidated her. Instead, it brought comfort. He'd traded his leather vest for a simple black t-shirt, though his tattoos still peeked out from under the sleeves. Madeline looked up from her work. "From the shelter?" "Yeah," he nodded, stepping inside. "Similar situation to yours, actually. She's scared, but ready to make a change." Madeline's heart tightened, remembering her own journey. She'd come so far from that terrified woman in the diner, writing "help" on a napkin. Now she worked at New Beginnings, a support center for domestic abuse survivors, while Jack had found his calling as an outreach coordinator, connecting with local shelters and support groups. "When is she coming in?" Madeline asked, already reaching for her calendar. "Tomorrow morning." Jack leaned against the doorframe, his expression softening. "You know, watching you help these women, it makes everything we went through worth it." Madeline smiled, touched by his words. "I never thought I'd find something that felt so right." She gestured to the office around her. "Every woman who walks through that door, I see myself in them. Their fear, their doubt, their hope. And you show them it's possible to start over," Jack added. "That's what makes you so good at this." The phone rang, interrupting their conversation. Madeline answered it, her voice professional but gentle. "New Beginnings? This is Madeline speaking." The voice on the other end was barely a whisper. I need help. My husband—" "You're safe to talk?" Madeline asked, immediately alert. Jack straightened, recognizing her tone. "Yes, for now. He's at work." "You're very brave for calling," Madeline said softly, reaching for her notepad. "I want you to know that whatever you're going through, you're not alone." As Madeline listened to the woman's story, taking notes and offering quiet encouragement, she felt that familiar surge of purpose. Each call like this reminded her of her own first steps toward freedom. Each trembling voice on the other end of the line strengthened her resolve to help others find their way out of the darkness. Jack waited patiently while she finished the call, setting up an appointment for the woman to come in. When Madeline hung up, she sat back in her chair, taking a deep breath. "Another one finding her courage," she said quietly. Jack nodded. "Just like you did." "It never gets easier, hearing their stories," Madeline admitted. "But knowing we can help them, knowing there's a way out." She looked around at the peaceful office, at the resources they'd gathered, at the support network they'd built. "This is what I was meant to do." She picked up the phone again, ready to make arrangements for their newest client. The fear in that woman's voice had sparked something in Madeline, not just empathy, but a fierce determination to help. She understood now that her past hadn't broken her. It had prepared her for this moment, for this purpose. The bell above the diner's door chimed as Madeline and Jack walked in. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh-baked pie filled the air, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the windows. Not much had changed since that fateful day. The same worn booths lined the walls, the same warm lights hung from the ceiling, and even some of the same regulars sat at the counter. Madeline's steps faltered slightly as they approached the booth where she'd sat months ago. Her fingers brushed against the smooth surface of the table, memories washing over her. Jack noticed her hesitation and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. She nodded, managing a small smile. "Just remembering." They slid into the booth, Jack taking the seat where he'd first spotted her, and Madeline sitting where she'd written that desperate plea for help. The vinyl cushions creaked softly beneath them. "I used to come here to escape," Madeline said, running her finger along the edge of the table. It felt safe somehow, neutral ground. The waitress approached with menus, but they both ordered coffee without looking. They'd been here enough times before to know what they wanted. "I remember seeing you that day," Jack said, his usually gruff voice softening. "Something about the way you kept looking over your shoulder, the way your hands shook when you picked up that napkin." He paused, his expression thoughtful. "Never thought this place would become so important to us." Madeline looked around the diner, taking in the quiet afternoon atmosphere. An elderly couple shared pie at one table, while a mother tried to keep her young children entertained at another. Normal, everyday scenes that once seemed so far out of reach for her. "I was terrified that day," she admitted. "Of Caleb, of the future, of asking for help." She met Jack's eyes. "Of you, at first." Jack's laugh was quiet but warm. "Can't blame you there. I wasn't exactly the picture of approachability." The waitress returned with their coffee, and they both wrapped their hands around the warm mugs. The familiar comfort of the ritual helped ease the weight of the memories. "But you saw me," Madeline continued after taking a sip. "Really saw me, when I felt invisible to everyone else, when I thought I deserved what was happening to me." Jack's expression darkened slightly at her words, but he remained silent, letting her speak. "This place," she gestured around them. "It's where everything changed, where I finally found the courage to ask for help, even if it was just writing it on a napkin." Something flickered in her eyes then, and she reached for the napkin dispenser on their table. Jack watched curiously as she pulled one out, smoothing it flat against the tabletop. The scene felt familiar, but different. This time her hands were steady, her movements sure. Madeline pulled a pen from her purse and wrote 2 simple words on the napkin. Her handwriting was clear and confident, nothing like the shaky scrawl from months ago. Carefully folding it, just as she had that first day, she slid it across the table to Jack. He unfolded it slowly, reading the words, "Thank you," written in her neat handwriting. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The simple message carried the weight of everything they'd been through together. Their eyes met across the table, and in that quiet moment, surrounded by the gentle hum of diner conversation and afternoon sunlight, they both understood. This wasn't just a place where their story had begun. It was where a new chapter was starting. Madeline walked along the winding path of Cedar Park, her steps light and unhurried. The late afternoon sun filtered through the canopy of maple trees, creating dappled patterns on the ground before her. A gentle breeze carried the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and somewhere nearby, birds called to each other in cheerful melodies. She paused near a wooden bench, the same one where she'd spent countless lunch breaks in recent weeks. The weathered wood held memories of quiet conversations and shared hopes. Running her hand along its smooth surface, Madeline marveled at how different everything felt now. Just months ago, she wouldn't have dared to walk alone in a park. Back then, Caleb controlled her every move, questioning her whereabouts, demanding explanations for even the smallest detours from her usual routine. The memory of that constant fear felt distant now, like a bad dream that was finally fading. A group of children raced past her, their laughter echoing through the trees. Madeline smiled, remembering how she used to flinch at sudden noises. Now she could appreciate the simple joy in their playful shouts. She continued walking, following the path as it curved around a small pond where ducks glided peacefully across the surface. The weight that had lived in her chest for so long, that terrible, crushing pressure of fear and shame, had lifted. In its place was something new, hope, strength, and a sense of possibility she'd forgotten could exist. She touched the small pendant around her neck, a gift from the women's support group she now helped lead. The silver circle symbolized healing and new beginnings, reminding her daily of how far she'd come. Memories of that day in the diner drifted through her mind. She could still feel the trembling in her hands as she'd written that single word, help, on the napkin. How desperate and alone she'd felt in that moment, not knowing if anyone would notice, if anyone would care. But someone had noticed. Someone had cared. The path led her to a flowering dogwood tree, its white blossoms swaying gently in the breeze. She remembered the first time she'd visited this park after leaving Caleb, how even the beauty of nature had seemed threatening then. Every shadow had held danger, every stranger a potential threat. Now, she could stand here alone, peaceful and unafraid. She heard familiar footsteps approaching from behind, steady, sure steps that she'd grown to know well. A smile spread across her face before she even turned around. Jack's large frame cast a shadow beside her, but it wasn't intimidating anymore. Instead, it represented safety, protection, and unconditional support. "Thought I might find you here," he said softly, his voice carrying that gentle tone he seemed to reserve just for her. Madeline turned to face him, noting how the sunlight caught the silver in his beard, how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. The man who had once seemed so frightening now represented everything good in her new life. Without hesitation, Jack reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. The gesture was simple, but spoke volumes about their journey together. They began walking side by side, their steps naturally falling into sync. The path stretched before them, winding through the park's peaceful landscape. Neither felt the need to speak, comfortable in the quiet understanding they shared. Together they walked hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. The evening sky painted a masterpiece above their heads, streaks of orange and pink melting into deep purple clouds. From their front porch, Madeline and Jack sat side by side on the weathered wooden swing, its gentle creaking a soothing rhythm in the quiet dusk. Their new home wasn't fancy, just a modest two-bedroom house with white siding and blue shutters. But to Madeline, it was perfect. Flower boxes hung beneath each window, bursting with bright petunias she'd planted herself. The porch light cast a warm glow around them, and wind chimes tinkled softly in the evening breeze. Madeline wrapped her hands around her mug of chamomile tea, letting its warmth seep into her fingers. She glanced at Jack, studying his profile in the fading light. His beard was neatly trimmed now, and he wore a simple flannel shirt instead of his old leather jacket. The tattoos on his arms were still visible, but they told a different story these days, one of transformation and redemption. "Remember when I was terrified of you?" she asked softly, a slight smile playing at her lips. Jack chuckled, the sound deep and warm. "Can't blame you for that. I wasn't exactly the friendliest-looking guy at that diner. But you were exactly who I needed that day." Madeline took a sip of her tea, remembering how her hands had trembled as she wrote that plea for help on the napkin. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if you hadn't been there." "Don't," Jack said gently, placing his large hand over hers. "You're stronger than you know. You would have found your way out eventually." The sunset's golden light caught the silver highlights in his beard, and Madeline noticed the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, lines earned from months of genuine smiles rather than years of hardship. He'd changed too, in his own way. The anger that once simmered beneath his surface had given way to a deep, abiding peace. Their front yard was small but well tended, with a maple tree that was just beginning to show its fall colors. A robin hopped across the grass, searching for its evening meal. Everything about this moment felt right, felt like home. "The women's shelter called today," Madeline said, breaking the comfortable silence. 3 more families needed help this week. She didn't need to elaborate. Jack knew what that meant. His network of reformed bikers would be busy, ensuring safe passages and new beginnings for those in need. "We'll help them," he said simply, his voice carrying the quiet conviction that had drawn her to trust him in the first place. The swing creaked gently as they rocked, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in brilliant hues. A cool breeze rustled the leaves of the maple tree, carrying with it the promise of autumn. In the distance, a neighbor's wind chimes created a peaceful melody. Madeline leaned her head against Jack's shoulder, feeling the solid strength of him. The fear that had been her constant companion for so long was gone, replaced by a sense of security she'd never known was possible. Each day brought new possibilities, new chances to help others find their way to freedom, just as she had. Jack's hand found hers, his grip warm and reassuring. They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, each lost in their own thoughts, but connected by everything they'd been through together. Madeline squeezed his hand gently and whispered, "Thank you. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day."